He satisfies the billionaire, pretending to be broken, testing every woman who sat across from him at dinner. But the night one stranger quietly paid his bill without a word, Adrian Cole realized he had finally met someone he couldn't test. Because she already had everything he was hiding: 2 billionaires, one satisfying lie, and a little boy caught in the middle of it all. If you want to see how this satisfying story ends, stay with me until the very last satisfying word. Hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. This is a story about love, deception, and the terrifying moment when you have to choose between protecting yourself and letting someone in. Adrian Cole sat alone at a table for two in a restaurant he had no business being in. Not because he couldn't afford it. He could have bought the building, the block it sat on, and the parking garage across the street without checking his bank balance. At 32, Adrian was the sole owner of Meridian Logistics International, a freight and supply chain empire that moved goods across 4 continents and generated revenues most people couldn't pronounce without stumbling. His name didn't appear on magazine covers. He had no social media. He attended no galas, accepted no interviews, and had spent the better part of 3 years making sure no photograph of him existed anywhere that could be tied to the company's balance sheet. Tonight, though, he was just a guy in a navy button-down and khakis, nursing a glass of water and watching the front door. His date was 20 minutes late. He picked up his phone, scrolled to the text confirmation she'd sent that afternoon. "See you at 7. Can't wait," and set it back face down on the tablecloth. The waiter had already come by twice. Adrian ordered bread both times just to have something on the table. His best friend Marcus had set this one up. "She's different," Marcus had promised over the phone 3 days ago. "She's not like the last one, or the one before that, or the 7 before that." "You said that about the woman who asked me what kind of car I drove before the appetizers came out," Adrian had replied. "Okay, that one was my fault. But Danielle is grounded. She's a kindergarten teacher, man. Kindergarten teachers are good people." Adrian hadn't argued. He'd just written down the restaurant name, picked out a shirt that looked like it came from a department store clearance rack, and left his watch, the one worth more than most people's houses, locked in his bedroom safe. Because that was the game. That was always the game. He'd been doing this for almost 2 years now. Blind dates, setups, even a few dating apps where he used photos that made him look aggressively average. In every scenario, he presented himself the same way. Adrian Cole, mid-level operations manager at a shipping company, decent salary, small apartment, single dad. Nothing flashy, nothing impressive, nothing that would make anyone's eyes light up for the wrong reasons. He wanted to see who stayed when the table was ordinary. So far, nobody had. The restaurant door opened and a woman walked in. Tall, dark hair pulled back, wearing a green dress that looked like she'd actually tried. She scanned the room, spotted Adrian, and her face did that thing he'd seen too many times. The quick assessment, the micro-expression that lasted half a second where she compared the man in front of her to whatever picture she'd built in her head. She walked over anyway. "Adrian? That's me." He stood, pulled out her chair, and smiled the way he'd trained himself to smile on these nights. Warm, but not too eager. Confident, but not polished. "Danielle? Hi. Sorry I'm late. Parking was a nightmare." She sat down, tucked her purse against the chair leg, and immediately picked up the menu. "Have you been here before?" "First time," Adrian lied. He'd eaten here 3 times this month. The head chef owed him a favor from a contract negotiation 2 years ago. "Marcus said the pasta's good." "Marcus has good taste." She smiled at him, a real smile, which was encouraging, and then glanced around the restaurant. "This place is cute. Not too fancy." Adrian watched her eyes. He was always watching eyes. It was the part of him he hated most. The part that had turned first dates into clinical evaluations, but he couldn't help it. He'd learned the hard way that words could lie beautifully. Eyes were harder to fake. "So," Danielle said, setting down the menu, "Marcus told me you work in logistics?" "Yeah, operations side, mostly coordinating shipments, making sure stuff gets where it needs to go." He kept his voice even, unremarkable. "It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." "That's cool. I mean, someone has to keep the world running, right?" She laughed, and it sounded genuine. "I teach kindergarten, so my version of logistics is making sure 25-year-olds don't eat glue." Adrian laughed. Actually laughed, not the polite version. That sounds harder than anything I do. It has its moments. The waiter came. They ordered. Adrian picked the chicken. Danielle went with a salad and a glass of wine. The conversation moved easily enough. She talked about her students, a kid named Oliver who had recently announced he was going to be a professional dog when he grew up. Adrian told her about his son, Ethan, who was 6 and currently obsessed with building forts out of couch cushions. He sounds adorable, Danielle said. He's a handful. Best kind, though. For about 40 minutes, Adrian let himself believe this one might be different. Danielle seemed kind, seemed present, seemed like someone who actually listened when he talked instead of waiting for her turn to speak. Then the check came. Adrian had planned this part. He always planned this part. When the waiter set the black folder on the table, Adrian reached into his back pocket, frowned, patted his jacket, and then let his face fall into an expression of genuine embarrassment. Oh no. He closed his eyes. I think I left my wallet in the car. He watched her. The shift was immediate. Not dramatic. Danielle was too polite for dramatic, but unmistakable. Her smile tightened at the corners. Her fingers, which had been resting easily on the tablecloth, curled inward. Oh, she said. I'm so sorry. I can run out and check. It might be in the glove box. I was rushing to get here on time, and I think I just... No, it's fine. She was already reaching for her purse, but her movements had changed. Stiffer, calculated. I can cover it. Are you sure? I feel terrible. I'll pay you back. It's really fine, Adrian. But it wasn't fine. He could see it in the way she held her wine glass after paying, loose, distant, like she'd already mentally left the building. The conversation that followed was polite, in the way conversations become when someone has decided the evening is over but doesn't want to be rude about it. They walked to the parking lot together. Danielle's goodbye was quick. A brief hug, this was nice, and a promise to do it again sometime that they both knew was empty. Adrian watched her drive away. He stood in the parking lot with his hands in his pockets and the taste of something bitter at the back of his throat, something that had nothing to do with dinner. He pulled his phone out. 3 missed calls from Marcus. He didn't call back. Instead, he walked to his car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic he kept specifically for these occasions, parked next to a Porsche that belonged to someone who probably made a fraction of what he did, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The wallet was in his jacket pocket. It had been there the entire time. Inside it sat a black card with no spending limit and enough available credit to buy the restaurant and everyone in it dinner for a year. Adrian pressed his forehead against the steering wheel and breathed. This was the 11th date in 14 months that had ended this way. Some women had been more gracious about it. A few had split the check without hesitation, but then never responded to his follow-up text. 2 had actually gotten angry. One had told him point blank that a man who couldn't afford dinner had no business asking women out. And every single time, Adrian told himself the same thing. This is necessary. This is how you protect Ethan. Because Ethan was the reason for all of it. Not the company, not the money, not the empire Adrian had built from a single warehouse in South Carolina when he was 24. Ethan was the reason Adrian ate dinner alone most nights. The reason he drove a car with a dent in the bumper. The reason he vetted every person who came within arm's reach of his life. Ethan's mother, Sophie, had died when Ethan was 2. Brain aneurysm. No warning, no symptoms, no dramatic hospital scene. One morning she was making breakfast, laughing at something on her phone, and by noon she was gone. Adrian had been at work when the call came. He remembered the exact temperature of his coffee when he picked up the phone, lukewarm, because he'd been in back-to-back meetings and kept forgetting to drink it. He remembered the sound of his assistant's voice, cracking on the word hospital. He remembered driving 90 miles an hour down the freeway and arriving too late for everything except paperwork. For the first year after Sophie died, Adrian barely functioned. His mother moved in to help with Ethan. Marcus handled the company's day-to-day operations. Adrian existed in a fog of grief that made the simplest decisions, what to eat, when to sleep, whether to shower, feel like puzzles written in a language he'd forgotten. Ethan pulled him out of it, not through some cinematic breakthrough, but through the slow, relentless neediness of a toddler who didn't understand why his mother wasn't coming home. Ethan needed to be fed, He needed someone to show up, and Adrian, who had failed at everything else that year, decided he would not fail at that. By the time Ethan turned 4, Adrian had rebuilt himself into something functional. He was present. He was engaged. He ran his company with a kind of cold precision that scared his executives and impressed his board. But inside, in the part of himself he never let anyone see, Adrian was terrified. Not of being alone. He'd made peace with that. He was terrified of letting the wrong person in, because he'd watched it happen to other people. Colleagues who remarried too quickly and introduced their children to partners who turned out to be selfish, or manipulative, or simply indifferent to a kid who wasn't theirs. Adrian had a board member whose second wife had openly referred to his daughter from his first marriage as the baggage. He'd watched a friend's new girlfriend grow resentful of every weekend spent at soccer games instead of restaurants. Adrian swore he would never let that happen to Ethan. Never. Not even if it meant spending the rest of his life eating dinner alone at tables for 2. So he built the test. It was simple, and he knew it was manipulative, and he did it anyway. He stripped away every external advantage, the money, the status, the power, and presented himself as ordinary. Then he watched what happened. Because Adrian believed, with the conviction of a man who had lost everything once and refused to lose anything again, that the only way to know if someone truly cared was to remove every reason they shouldn't. The problem, of course, was that nobody passed. He started the car and drove home. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street in a neighborhood that looked upper middle class but not extravagant. Adrian owned 3 other properties: a penthouse downtown, a beachfront home in Outer Banks, and a villa in Portugal he'd visited exactly once. But this was where he lived. This was where Ethan's room was, with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and the bin of Legos that Adrian stepped on at least twice a week in the dark. His mother, Linda, was reading on the couch when he walked in. "How'd it go?" she asked without looking up. "Fine." "That bad?" Adrian dropped his keys on the counter and opened the fridge. She was nice. She seemed genuine. And then she wasn't. Linda set her book down and looked at him over her reading glasses. She was 61, sharp as a tack, and had long since stopped pretending her son's dating habits were normal. "Adrian, don't." "I didn't say anything." "You said my name in that tone. That's saying something." She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and leaned against the counter across from him. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer." Adrian pulled out a bottle of water and unscrewed the cap. "Go ahead." "How long are you going to do this?" "Do what?" "Pretend to be poor and then act surprised when women react like normal human beings when they think they're stuck with the check." "That's not what That is exactly what you do. You walk into a nice restaurant, you dress like you shop at Goodwill, you order the cheapest thing on the menu, and then you fake forgetting your wallet to see if some woman will still smile at you. You don't think that's a little unfair?" Adrian took a long drink of water. "I think it's necessary." "For who?" "For Ethan." Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ethan is 6 years old. He doesn't need a mother who passed a financial stress test. He needs a father who's actually happy." "I am happy." "You came home at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, alone, for the 11th time. You're not happy, Adrian. You're controlled. There's a difference." He didn't answer. He finished his water, kissed his mother on the forehead, and went upstairs to check on Ethan. The boy was asleep, sprawled diagonally across the bed with one foot hanging off the edge and a stuffed dinosaur clutched against his chest. Adrian stood in the doorway and watched him breathe. There was a drawing on the nightstand, crayon, messy, that showed 2 stick figures holding hands, one big, one small. Underneath, in letters that wobbled like they'd been written during an earthquake, Ethan had written, "Me and Dad." Adrian picked it up, looked at it for a long time, and set it back down. 2 figures. Always 2. He closed the door quietly and went to bed. The next evening, Adrian did something he almost never did. He went back to the same restaurant. Not for a date. He told himself he just wanted a quiet dinner alone, a good meal, a glass of wine, an hour where he didn't have to perform for anyone. His mother was with Ethan. Marcus had texted asking if he wanted to grab beers, and Adrian had declined with a vague excuse about being tired. He wasn't tired. He was restless in a way he couldn't name, and for reasons he didn't want to examine, the restaurant felt like the right place to sit with that restlessness. He arrived at 7:30, asked for a corner table, and ordered without looking at the menu. The waiter recognized him from the night before, but was professional enough not to mention it. The restaurant was busier tonight, a Saturday crowd, mostly couples and small groups, the kind of ambient noise that made solitude feel less conspicuous. Adrian ate slowly. He watched people the way he always watched people, cataloging small details without meaning to. The couple by the window, who were clearly on a first date. She kept tucking her hair behind her ear, he kept straightening his silverware. The group of 4 women near the bar celebrating something, their laughter cutting through the room at irregular intervals. And then there was the woman sitting alone 3 tables away. She caught his attention not because she was trying to, but because she so clearly wasn't. She sat with perfect posture, a glass of red wine in front of her, reading something on her phone with an expression that hovered between concentration and exhaustion. Her dark hair was pulled into a low bun, slightly uneven, as if she'd done it in a hurry. She wore a charcoal blazer over a simple white top, the kind of outfit that suggested she'd come straight from work and hadn't bothered to change. She was beautiful. Not in the way the city defined beauty, not the polished, curated, Instagram-ready kind. She was beautiful the way a thunderstorm was beautiful. Striking, a little intimidating, and completely uninterested in your opinion about it. Adrian looked away. He was not here to notice women. He was here to eat chicken and be miserable in peace. But his eyes kept drifting. He watched her order food, eat alone without any apparent discomfort, and exchange exactly 3 words with her waiter. Thank you, and perfect. She never looked around the room. She never checked to see if anyone was looking at her. She existed in her own atmosphere, sealed off from the noise and movement around her. And there was something about that self-containment that made Adrian's chest tighten in a way he did not appreciate. He forced himself to focus on his plate. About 40 minutes into his meal, something happened at a table near the entrance. A man and a woman, clearly on a date, had been talking in increasingly strained tones for the last 10 minutes. Adrian hadn't been eavesdropping exactly, but the restaurant's acoustics made privacy difficult, and the man's voice had been rising steadily. I just think it's basic courtesy, the man was saying. If a guy takes you out, the least you can do is be present. You've checked your phone 3 times. I told you, my sister's in the hospital. I'm waiting for an update. Right, your sister. The woman stared at him. What is that supposed to mean? It means I've been on a lot of dates where women use their phones as an escape hatch. I'm just saying. My sister had surgery today. And you still came to dinner? The woman stood up. She didn't make a scene. She picked up her jacket, put it on with calm, deliberate movements, and said, I came because I thought you might be worth it. I was wrong. Good night. She walked out. The man sat alone at the table, visibly embarrassed, and then did what Adrian found absolutely predictable. He waved the waiter over, paid his half of the check, and left the woman's unpaid portion sitting on the table. The waiter looked at the remaining bill, looked at the empty chair, and then looked around the restaurant with the expression of someone who dealt with this kind of thing more often than anyone should have to. Adrian watched. He was about to signal the waiter and cover it himself. It was the kind of small, anonymous gesture he made regularly, partly out of decency and partly because spending money on strangers was the one form of generosity that didn't require emotional investment. When the woman 3 tables away did something that stopped him. She raised her hand, not dramatically, not with any fanfare, just a slight lift of her fingers catching the waiter's eye. Excuse me, she said, and her voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that expected to be listened to without needing to be loud. Could you add that to my check? The waiter blinked. The other table's bill? Yes. Ma'am, that's really not... It's fine. Just add it. No speech. No grand statement about solidarity or kindness. She said it the way someone might ask for a refill on water, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world and not worth discussing further. The waiter nodded, collected the abandoned check, and walked away. The woman went back to her phone. Adrian sat very still. He was aware that his fork had been suspended halfway to his mouth for an uncomfortably long time, and that he was staring, which was rude, which he knew, which did not make him stop. It wasn't the generosity that struck him. He'd been around generous people his entire career, donors, philanthropists, executives who wrote six-figure checks at charity galas while cameras flashed. This was different. This was generosity with absolutely no audience, no reward, no angle. She hadn't even looked at the woman who'd left. She hadn't made eye contact with anyone in the restaurant to see if her gesture had been noticed. She'd just done it, the way breathing happens, automatically, without thought, without the need for anyone to applaud. Adrian set his fork down. He wanted to talk to her. The impulse was so immediate and so strong that it actually frightened him, because Adrian Cole did not have impulses when it came to women. He had strategies, he had protocols. He had a carefully designed system that removed all spontaneity from the equation and replaced it with control. This felt nothing like control. He argued with himself for a full 5 minutes. Then he did something impulsive for the first time in years. He asked the waiter to bring him his check, and when it came, he added a note. Not for her, for the waiter. The woman sitting alone. When she asks for her bill, tell her it's been taken care of. Don't point me out. Don't say anything else. He paid, left a tip that would make the waiter's week, and walked toward the exit. He was 3 steps from the door when her voice stopped him. "Excuse me." He turned. She was standing, her phone in one hand, her blazer draped over the opposite arm. Up close, she was even more striking. Dark eyes that missed nothing, a face that held its composure the way a dam holds water, with visible effort and no guarantees. "Did you just pay my bill?" she asked. Adrian considered lying. Old habits. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you paid someone else's." She studied him for a moment. Her expression wasn't grateful or flattered or any of the things he would have expected. She looked like she was solving a math problem. "That's a strange reason." "Probably." "I don't need someone to cover my dinner." "I know." "You don't know anything about me." "I know you paid a stranger's bill without thinking twice about it. That told me enough." She tilted her head slightly, and for a fraction of a second, something shifted behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity, or the faintest crack in whatever wall she'd built around herself. "What's your name?" she asked. "Adrian." "Victoria." She didn't extend her hand, she didn't smile. She just looked at him with those dark, unreadable eyes and said, "Don't follow me home, Adrian." And then she walked out. He stood there, in the doorway of a restaurant he shouldn't have come back to, holding a receipt for a meal that had cost him almost nothing and an interaction that had cost him something he couldn't yet calculate. He went home. Ethan was asleep again. Linda was watching a documentary about penguins. "You look different," she said when he walked in. "Different how?" "I don't know, less miserable." "Thanks, Mom." "I'm serious. Did something happen?" "I ate dinner." "Alone?" "Yes." She narrowed her eyes. "You're lying." "I'm not lying. I ate dinner alone." He paused. "And then I talked to someone for about 45 seconds. Linda sat up straighter. "Who?" "A woman. At the restaurant." "A date?" "No, just someone." "Someone who made you look less miserable after 45 seconds?" Adrian walked past her toward the stairs. "Good night, Mom." "Adrian Cole, you come back here and—" "Good night." He could hear her laughing as he closed his bedroom door. He lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the way Victoria had said, "Don't follow me home." Not with fear or flirtation, but with the tired authority of someone who had said it before. Someone who had spent enough time being pursued by people with agendas that the instruction had become reflexive. He recognized it, that particular brand of wariness. He wore a version of it himself. He didn't sleep well. Monday morning, Adrian arrived at Meridian's headquarters at 6:30, the way he did every weekday. The building was a glass tower downtown, 42 floors, his name nowhere on the exterior. He entered through a private garage, took a private elevator, and reached his office on the top floor without passing a single person who didn't have security clearance. His assistant, Grace, was already there. She was 53, had worked for him for 7 years, and had the organizational capacity of a military general and the emotional radar of a therapist. "Good morning," she said, handing him coffee. "You have the Tokyo call at 8, the infrastructure review at 10, and Marcus wants 15 minutes before lunch." "What does Marcus want?" He didn't say. He was smiling, though, which usually means he's about to suggest something you'll hate. Adrian took the coffee. Accurate. The morning passed in the usual rhythm of calls, reports, and decisions that moved millions of dollars across time zones. Adrian was good at this. The cold architecture of commerce, the logic puzzles of supply chains and profit margins. This part of his life made sense. Numbers didn't lie. Contracts didn't pretend to be something they weren't. Cargo didn't leave because you forgot your wallet at dinner. Marcus showed up at 11:45 sharp. He was Adrian's age, black, built like a former college athlete who still pretended he was one, and had been Adrian's closest friend since their freshman dorm at Georgetown. He was also Meridian's chief operating officer, the only person outside of family who knew the full extent of Adrian's fortune, and the man most responsible for Adrian's terrible dating life. "Before you say anything," Marcus said, dropping into the chair across from Adrian's desk, "Danielle texted me." "Great. She said you were nice. She said the conversation was good. And then she said, and I quote, 'He seems like a sweet guy, but I'm looking for someone who's a little more established.'" Adrian sipped his coffee. "Established. Her word, not mine. I own a company worth $11 billion, Marcus. She doesn't know that. That's the whole point. She thinks you're a guy who forgets his wallet and drives a Civic." "And now I know what she's looking for." Marcus leaned forward. "Bro, I love you. You're my best friend, and I would take a bullet for you. But this thing you do, this undercover boss dating strategy, it is insane. You know that, right? It works." "It doesn't work. That's literally the problem. It has never worked. You've been doing this for 2 years and you're still single." "Which means every woman I've met has failed the test." "Or it means the test is broken." Adrian set his coffee down. "The test isn't broken. People are just exactly who I think they are." Marcus stared at him for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Not all of them, man. Not all of them are Sophie." The room got very still. "Sophie didn't leave me because of money," Adrian said. "I know. She died." "I know that too." "Then why would you—" "Because you're punishing every woman you meet for something that wasn't anyone's fault. Sophie left because her body failed her. That's not betrayal. That's tragedy. And you've turned it into a reason to never let anyone get close again." Adrian didn't respond. Marcus stood up. "I'm not setting you up anymore, not because I've given up on you, but because I think you need to figure this out without a wingman." He paused at the door. "And for what it's worth, Danielle was fine. She wasn't great. She wasn't terrible. She was fine. The real reason that date didn't work out isn't because she cared about money. It's because you walked in already knowing it wouldn't work." He left. Adrian sat alone in his corner office, 42 floors above a city full of people who didn't know his name, and thought about a woman named Victoria who had paid a stranger's dinner bill like it was nothing. He thought about it all day. That evening, Adrian picked Ethan up from Linda's house. The boy ran to him the way he always did, full speed, arms out, no hesitation. Adrian caught him, lifted him up, and felt the familiar weight of his son against his chest, the small hands gripping his jacket, the warm breath against his neck. "Dad! Dad! Dad! What? Can we get pizza?" "We had pizza on Wednesday." "That was 100 years ago." "It was 4 days ago." "Same thing." They got pizza. They ate it in the car because Ethan insisted that pizza tasted better in cars, which was a theory Adrian had never been able to disprove. Ethan talked without stopping, about a caterpillar he'd found at recess, about his friend Jalen who could burp the alphabet, about a dream he'd had where their house was made of marshmallows. Adrian listened to all of it, every word, because this messy, exhausting, beautiful chaos was the only thing he'd ever done right. Later, after bath time and 2 bedtime stories and a negotiation about whether the hallway light could stay on, it could, Adrian sat on the couch with his laptop and did something he told himself was routine research. He searched for Victoria Hale. The results were immediate, extensive, and staggering. Victoria Hale, age 30. CEO of Hale Enterprises, a multinational consulting and investment firm with offices in New York, London, Singapore, and Dubai. Net worth estimated at $2.4 billion. youngest female CEO to lead a company through an IPO on the New York Stock Exchange. Featured in Fortune, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. Named to multiple 30 under 30 and most powerful women lists. No public romantic relationships, no scandals, no interviews that weren't strictly about business. Adrian closed the laptop. He opened it again. He read 3 more articles, each more impressive than the last. Victoria Hale had inherited a struggling family consulting firm at 25 after her father's retirement and had transformed it into one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the world. She was known for being brilliant, ruthless in negotiations, and pathologically private. One profile described her as the most powerful woman most people have never heard of. Adrian closed the laptop again. This time, he kept it closed. He sat in the dark living room of his deliberately modest house and processed the fact that the woman who had paid a stranger's dinner bill, casually, without thought, the way other people held doors, was worth $2.4 billion. She hadn't done it because she was generous with other people's money or because she was performing kindness for an audience. She'd done it because that was who she was. The money was incidental. The character was the point. And she'd looked at Adrian. Adrian in his department store clothes. Adrian with his Honda Civic and his fake mid-level job and his carefully constructed averageness. And hadn't seen any of it. Hadn't cared. Hadn't assessed his net worth in the first 30 seconds the way almost everyone else did, either inflating it based on hope or deflating it based on evidence. She'd just looked at him, and then she'd told him not to follow her home. Adrian picked up his phone. He stared at it for a long time. Then he opened his email and typed a message to Grace. I need you to find a contact for Victoria Hale. Business contact is fine. Don't use the company's name. Use my personal email. And Grace, don't ask why. He sent it and immediately felt ridiculous. Then he felt anxious. Then he felt something he hadn't felt in so long that it took him a full minute to identify it. Hope. It was small and uncertain, and it sat in his chest like a bird that had flown into a room and couldn't find the window. But it was there. For the first time in years, it was there. He turned off the lights and went to check on Ethan. The boy had rolled sideways again, the dinosaur crushed beneath his cheek, one sock on and one sock missing. Adrian straightened the blanket, picked up the sock from the floor, and stood there in the soft glow of the hallway light. 2 figures on a crayon drawing, 2 figures at every dinner table, 2 figures in every story Ethan told. Maybe, Adrian thought, maybe that's not the only number. He closed the door, walked to his bedroom, and lay in the dark with his phone on his chest, waiting for a reply he had no right to expect. The night settled around him, quiet, and full of questions he wasn't ready to answer. Word count, approximately 6,700 words. Grace replied at 6:14 the next morning. Victoria Hale's executive assistant is named Claire Mathis, direct office line below. I didn't use the company name. I also didn't ask why, but I want you to know that not asking is physically painful for me. Adrian read the email 3 times, saved the number, and spent the next 4 hours not calling it. He went through his morning routine on autopilot: coffee, shower, Ethan's breakfast, the drive to school. Ethan talked the entire way about a girl in his class named Ruby who had apparently challenged him to a staring contest and won. She didn't even blink, Dad. Not once. I think something's wrong with her eyes. Or she's just better at staring than you. Nobody's better at staring than me. Except Ruby, apparently. Ethan considered this with the gravity of a philosopher confronting a paradox. I want a rematch. Adrian dropped him off, watched him run through the school doors without looking back, and sat in the parking lot with Victoria's number glowing on his phone screen. He was being ridiculous. He knew that. He'd spoken to this woman for less than a minute. He didn't know her voice when she laughed, didn't know if she drank coffee or tea, didn't know if she was the kind of person who returned shopping carts to the corral or left them in the parking space. He knew exactly 2 things about her. She was worth billions, and she'd paid a stranger's bill without hesitation. And there was a third thing, if he was being honest. The way she'd looked at him, not through him, not past him, not at the surface of him, at him. Like she was trying to decide whether the person standing in front of her was real. He called the number. A woman answered on the second ring, professional and clipped. Miss Hale's office, this is Claire. Hi. My name is Adrian Cole. This is going to sound strange. I met Ms. Hale briefly at a restaurant last Saturday evening. I'd like to invite her for coffee. I don't have her personal number, and I want to be upfront that this is not a business inquiry. Silence. Then, you met her at a restaurant? Yes. And she gave you her name? She did. But not her number. Correct. Another pause. Mr. Cole, I receive approximately 15 calls a week from men who claim to have met Ms. Hale at various locations and would like her personal contact information. Last month, someone said they'd bonded over a shared love of elevators. I don't have a shared love of elevators. That's reassuring. Can you tell me specifically what happened at the restaurant? Adrian hesitated. She paid another table's bill. I paid hers. She told me not to follow her home. That was the full extent of our interaction. Claire was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then she said, "Hold on." The hold music was classical. Adrian sat in a school parking lot listening to Vivaldi and wondering when exactly his life had become this. Claire came back. "Mr. Cole, Miss Hale has agreed to a coffee meeting. She has a 45-minute window tomorrow at 2 p.m. There's a cafe called Benton's on Market Street. She said," and this is a direct quote, "tell him not to pay for anything this time." Adrian smiled. It happened before he could stop it, and it stayed longer than he expected. "I'll be there," he said. He arrived at Benton's 15 minutes early the next afternoon, wearing the same kind of deliberately unremarkable clothes he wore everywhere. Dark jeans, a gray Henley, boots that looked like they'd seen some weather. He ordered a black coffee and chose a table near the window where the light was good and the acoustics were terrible, which meant nobody nearby would be able to eavesdrop without effort. Victoria walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. She wore dark slacks and a cream-colored blouse. No jewelry except for a thin gold watch that Adrian recognized as absurdly expensive only because he owned one from the same maker. Her hair was down today, darker than he remembered, falling past her shoulders in a way that looked like she'd simply let it do whatever it wanted. She spotted him immediately, crossed the room without hesitation, and sat down across from him without any of the preliminary social theater. No hug, no handshake, no, "Oh, it's so nice to see you again." "Adrian," she said. "Victoria, you called my office." "I did." "Claire said you were polite. She also said you sounded nervous. She's very good at detecting nervousness." "I was nervous." "Why?" Adrian considered several diplomatic answers and rejected all of them. "Because I haven't asked anyone for coffee in about 3 years, and the last time I did, it was part of a system I had in place, and this isn't part of any system. I just wanted to talk to you." Victoria flagged the waiter and ordered an espresso without looking at the menu. Then she turned back to Adrian and studied him with the same analytical intensity he remembered from the restaurant. "Tell me something about yourself," she said. "Something that isn't your job." "I have a 6-year-old son named Ethan." "Tell me something about Ethan." "He lost a staring contest yesterday and he's still processing it emotionally." The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, but the structural foundation of one. "Who beat him?" "A girl named Ruby. He's demanding a rematch." "Smart girl." She paused. "And his mother?" "She passed away 4 years ago. Aneurysm." Victoria didn't flinch. She didn't offer condolences in that rehearsed way people do when death comes up in casual conversation. The hollow sorry for your loss that functions more as a social exit than an expression of empathy. She just held his gaze and nodded, once, as if she understood that some information required acknowledgement, but not decoration. "That must have been hard," she said. "It was." "Is it still?" Adrian paused. Nobody asked that. People asked how he was doing, which was a question about the present. People asked how Ethan was handling it, which was a question about his son. Nobody asked if the original wound still hurt. "Some days," he said, "most days it's background noise. But sometimes Ethan says something that sounds like her, or laughs in a way that's exactly the way she used to laugh. And it hits me like the first day again." Victoria wrapped her hands around her espresso cup. "My mother died when I was 19, ovarian cancer. She fought it for 2 years and she fought it hard, and then one morning she stopped fighting and it was over in a way that made all the fighting feel pointless." "I'm sorry." "It was 11 years ago. And it still hits me like the first day sometimes. They sat with that for a moment. Not in silence, exactly. The cafe buzzed around them, the espresso machine hissing, a couple arguing softly about parking, a child somewhere making the specific high-pitched noise children make when they've been told to be quiet and have chosen violence instead, but in a shared space that felt separate from all of it. "So," Victoria said, "your turn. Tell me why you were at that restaurant alone on a Saturday night." Adrian set his coffee down. Here was the fork in the road. He could tell her the truth, that he'd been on a failed date the night before, that he was running a years-long screening operation on potential partners, that he was a billionaire pretending to be ordinary because he trusted no one. Or he could stay in character. He could be the guy in the Henley, operations manager, Honda Civic, average. He chose the middle. "I'd had a bad week. I wanted a quiet dinner. I wasn't planning to talk to anyone. And then a woman paid someone else's bill and you lost all your plans." "Something like that." Victoria sipped her espresso. "I don't usually accept invitations from strangers. Claire thinks I should get out more. My therapist thinks I should get out more. My board of directors probably thinks I should get out more, though they'd never say it to my face. What do you think?" "I think most people are exhausting." "Then why did you say yes?" She looked at him, really looked, the way she had in the restaurant doorway, and said, "Because you paid my bill without trying to get my number. You just left. That's either incredibly classy or incredibly stupid, and I wasn't sure which, and not being sure about something is rare enough that it interested me." Adrian laughed, an actual genuine laugh, the kind that came from somewhere low in his chest and caught him off guard. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, and this time the corner of her mouth moved further. "What's funny?" she asked. "I was going to say the same thing about you, the not being sure part." "You're not sure about me?" "I'm not sure about anything right now. That's new for me." They talked for 2 hours. The 45-minute window Claire had mentioned evaporated within the first 20 minutes, and neither of them acknowledged it. Victoria's phone buzzed 6 times. She flipped it over after the third buzz and didn't check it again. She told him about Hale Enterprises without bragging. She talked about her work the way a mechanic talks about engines, with fluency and precision and an obvious love for the machinery of it. She told him about her father, who had started the company in a one-room office in Philadelphia and run it into the ground with stubborn generosity, giving away more in handshakes than he collected in contracts. She told him about taking over at 25 and spending the first year convinced she was going to fail. "I didn't sleep," she said, "for months. I'd lie in bed and run numbers in my head until 3 in the morning and then get up at 5 and do it again. My assistant at the time, not Claire, the one before Claire, quit because she said I was emotionally corrosive, which was fair. You seem less corrosive now. I'm medicated." Adrian blinked. Victoria's expression didn't change. "That was a joke," she said. "Was it?" "Mostly." He grinned. She almost grinned back. Adrian told her about his own work. Carefully. He described the logistics industry, the challenge of moving goods across borders, the small satisfactions of solving problems that most people never thought about. He talked about the early days, when it was just him and a warehouse and a phone that never stopped ringing. He talked about the growth, the expansion, the moment when the company became something bigger than he'd imagined. But he kept the scale vague. He described himself as someone who'd done well enough in the industry, which was technically true the way saying the ocean was kind of damp was technically true. He mentioned employees and contracts and international markets, but he framed it all in the language of a small to mid-sized business owner, someone who was comfortable but not extraordinary. Victoria didn't push. She didn't ask his net worth or the size of his company or any of the questions that would have exposed the lie. She seemed genuinely uninterested in the financial architecture of his life, which made sense when Adrian remembered that she had her own financial architecture and it was worth $2.4 billion. Money was the air she breathed. It wasn't novel, it wasn't interesting, it was just there. What interested her was Ethan. "Tell me more about him," she said, leaning forward with her espresso long finished and her hands folded on the table. "What's he like when he's not losing staring contests?" "He's intense. Everything matters to him equally. A dead caterpillar gets the same emotional response as Christmas morning. He's generous in that way little kids are before they learn not to be. Last week he gave his favorite toy truck to a kid at school who was crying, and then he came home and cried because he missed the truck. That's painful. That's Ethan. He feels everything at full volume. Does he look like you? He looks like his mother. Same eyes, same chin, same way of frowning when he's concentrating. Victoria was quiet for a beat. Do you worry about him? Constantly. Not about the usual stuff. He's healthy, he's happy, he's doing fine in school. I worry about the stuff I can't control. I worry about what kind of man he'll become based on what kind of man I am right now. And what kind of man are you right now? The question landed like a stone in still water. Adrian felt the ripples spread through him, through the fake identity and the real grief and the fortress of habits he'd built to keep the world at arm's length. Working on it, he said. I'm working on it. They left the cafe at 4:15. Victoria had 17 missed calls on her phone, which she scrolled through with the detached efficiency of someone triaging a battlefield. Adrian walked her to the curb, where a black car was already waiting. She'd texted her driver at some point without Adrian noticing. I had a good time, she said, and the way she said it made Adrian think she wasn't used to saying it. So did I. I'm going to be out of the country for 10 days, Singapore, then London. My schedule is insane. Okay? I'm telling you that because I want to see you again, and I don't want you to think my silence means I'm not interested. I'll be busy, and I'm bad at texting, and I forget to call people even when I want to talk to them. Adrian felt that bird in his chest again, the one that had flown in through the window and couldn't find its way out. I'm patient, he said. Good. She opened the car door, then paused. Adrian? Yeah? The restaurant, the night we met. Were you on a date before I saw you? He froze. Not visibly. He was too practiced for that, but internally everything locked up. What makes you ask? You were at a table for two. You ate alone, but the waiter cleared 2 place settings after you left, I noticed. Of course she noticed. She was Victoria Hale. She noticed everything. Yes, he said. I was on a date. It didn't go well. She nodded, as if confirming something she'd already decided. And the night I saw you, you came back alone. I did. Why? He could feel the lie assembling itself, the safe, controlled, pre-approved answer that would keep his system intact. But standing on the curb with Victoria looking at him in the late afternoon light, her dark eyes patient and unblinking, he found he couldn't deploy it. Because I was lonely, he said. And I didn't want to admit it to anyone, so I went somewhere I could be lonely in public and call it dinner. Victoria looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I do that too. Except I do it in hotel rooms in cities where nobody knows my name. She got in the car. The door closed. The car pulled away. Adrian stood on the curb and watched it disappear into traffic, and the feeling inside his chest was no longer a bird. It was something larger, something with weight and warmth and the terrifying potential to grow into something he couldn't contain. Over the next 10 days, Victoria texted him 11 times. Each text arrived at odd hours. 2 in the morning from Singapore, 6 in the evening from London, midnight from somewhere over the Atlantic. The messages were short, stripped of emotion, the way her public persona was stripped of vulnerability. But Adrian learned quickly that Victoria's brevity wasn't coldness. It was compression. She packed entire feelings into single sentences. Ethan win the rematch yet? My hotel has a view of the Thames. It's raining. I don't mind. Someone at tonight's dinner talked for 40 minutes about himself. I thought of you. You didn't do that. Adrian responded to each one. He told her about Ethan's rematch with Ruby, which had ended in a disputed draw. He told her about a shipment of medical supplies that had gotten stuck in customs and required 3 days of phone calls to resolve. He sent her a photo Ethan had drawn of their house, with the caption, "My dad's boring house," in wobbly letters. Victoria responded to the photo with a single word. Perfect. When she returned from London, she called him. Not texted. Called. It was 9:30 at night, and Adrian was sitting on the couch reading a report he didn't care about. Are you busy? She asked. Her voice sounded different on the phone. Softer, less controlled, like the transatlantic hours had worn down whatever mechanism she used to modulate herself. Not even a little. I just landed. I'm in the car. I have jet lag, and I haven't eaten since yesterday, and I don't want to go to my apartment because it's empty and quiet, and I've had enough quiet. There's a diner on 5th that's open until midnight. Best grilled cheese in the city. I don't eat grilled cheese. You will after you try this one. She tried it. She ate the entire thing, plus half of Adrian's fries, and drank 3 cups of coffee that she declared adequate, which Adrian had already learned was Victoria's highest compliment for anything she hadn't personally selected. They sat in the back corner of the diner for 2.5 hours. The fluorescent lighting made everyone look slightly green. The vinyl booth squeaked every time either of them shifted, and a man at the counter had been reading the same newspaper page since they arrived. It was the best evening Adrian had spent in years. I have a confession, Victoria said, dragging a fry through ketchup. Already? I looked you up. After our first coffee. I Googled you. Adrian's stomach dropped. He kept his face neutral. Years of board meetings had given him a world-class poker face, but inside every alarm he had was ringing. What did you find? He asked, keeping his voice easy. Almost nothing. An Adrian Cole in shipping and logistics who seems to run a mid-sized firm out of the Southeast. Very little online presence, no social media, no photos I could verify were you. The alarms quieted slightly. His digital footprint by design was nearly invisible. He'd spent considerable money making sure that any casual search would dead end at a vague company profile without his picture, without his net worth, without anything that connected him to Meridian's $11 billion empire. I'm a private person, he said. So am I. She set the fry down. But I want to be honest with you about something. I don't like not knowing things. I've built my entire career on information, on having better data than everyone else in the room. And with you, I feel like I'm operating with incomplete information, and it makes me uneasy. What kind of information are you missing? I don't know. That's the problem. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to open your books or hand me your tax returns. I'm just telling you that transparency matters to me. If this, whatever this is going to go somewhere, I need to know I'm dealing with someone who's real. The irony of it was so sharp Adrian could taste it. Here was a woman asking for honesty, sitting across from a man who had built an entire false identity specifically to avoid giving it. I'm real, he said. And he meant it. The feelings were real. The conversations were real. The way he thought about her at 2 a.m. when Ethan was asleep and the house was dark, that was painfully real. But the rest of it, the mid-level job, the modest life, the carefully maintained illusion of ordinariness, that was a lie. And the longer he sat across from Victoria Hale, the more that lie felt less like protection and more like a wall he was building between himself and the only person in years who made him want to tear one down. I believe you, Victoria said, and somehow that made it worse. They left the diner at midnight. Victoria's driver was waiting again, engine idling at the curb. Adrian walked her to the car the way he always did, and Victoria paused with her hand on the door the way she always did, and for a moment they stood there in the strange amber light of the street, close enough to touch, far enough apart that touching would require a decision. Adrian, she said. Yeah? I'm glad you called my office. I'm glad Claire didn't hang up on me. She almost did. I told her not to. How did you know it was worth answering? Victoria opened the car door. I didn't. I just knew I'd regret it if I didn't find out. She got in. The car pulled away. Adrian stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets and the taste of coffee on his tongue and a lie sitting in his chest like a splinter he couldn't reach. He drove home, checked on Ethan, and sat in the dark kitchen with his phone on the counter and his head in his hands. He could tell her. He could call her right now and say, Victoria, I need to tell you something. I'm not who you think I am. I'm not a mid-level operations manager. I own one of the largest logistics companies in the world. I'm worth more than most countries' annual budgets. I lied because I was scared, and I kept lying because the longer I waited, the harder it got to stop. He could say all of that. He knew the words. He'd rehearsed them in his head a dozen times since the coffee shop, but every time he got close, he heard Marcus's voice. The test isn't broken. You're just afraid of what happens when someone passes it. And he heard his mother's voice. You're not happy, Adrian. You're controlled. And he heard Victoria's voice, clear and steady and more vulnerable than she probably realized. Transparency matters to me. Adrian put his phone down. He turned off the kitchen light. He walked upstairs, past Ethan's room where the hallway light glowed warm and steady, past the framed photo of Sophie that hung on the wall outside the bathroom, past all the evidence of a life built carefully around the absence of trust. He lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and the lie sat on his chest like a stone, and he did nothing about it. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening that had started with nothing remarkable about it, everything fell apart. Adrian and Victoria had settled into a rhythm by then, not a routine exactly, because Victoria's schedule was too chaotic and Adrian's double life was too carefully managed for anything resembling routine, but a rhythm. They saw each other 3 or 4 times a week. Coffee in the afternoons when Victoria could steal an hour between meetings. Late dinners at restaurants that were good enough to matter, but unassuming enough that neither of them attracted attention. Long drives on the weekends when Ethan was with Linda. The kind of aimless Sunday driving that had no destination and no purpose except to keep talking. Victoria had met Ethan twice. The first time was accidental. She'd come to pick Adrian up for dinner and he was running late because Ethan had decided that bath time was a negotiation, not a requirement. She'd waited in the living room while Adrian wrestled a 6-year-old into pajamas. And when he finally emerged, soaking wet and apologetic, he found Victoria sitting on the couch with Ethan beside her, both of them studying a picture book about dinosaurs with the kind of shared concentration that made Adrian's throat tighten. "This one's a T-Rex," Ethan had informed her, pointing at a page with absolute authority. "He eats everything." "Everything?" Victoria asked. "Everything, even buildings." "That seems excessive." "He's very hungry." Victoria had looked up at Adrian with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between amusement and a pain so old it had calcified into acceptance, and said, "I like this kid." The second time was deliberate. Adrian had invited her to the park on a Saturday afternoon, and the 3 of them had spent 2 hours on a bench while Ethan ran circles around a playground structure and periodically returned to deliver updates on his progress. Victoria brought a kite she'd bought on impulse from a street vendor. It was shaped like an octopus and flew terribly, which Ethan thought was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. By the end of the afternoon, Ethan had declared Victoria his second best friend, which was high praise considering the first spot was held by a boy named Jalen who could, reportedly, burp the entire alphabet. Those afternoons felt dangerous to Adrian, not because anything went wrong, but because everything went right in a way that made his lie harder to carry. Every time Victoria looked at Ethan with genuine affection, every time she texted Adrian asking how the staring contest saga was progressing, every time she showed up without makeup and without pretense and without any of the armor she wore in boardrooms, Adrian felt the distance between who he was and who he was pretending to be stretch a little thinner. He had almost told her 6 times. Each time, something stopped him. A phone call. A waiter bringing the check. Ethan running over with a question about whether worms had feelings. The universe, it seemed, was conspiring to let him keep lying, and Adrian was weak enough to let it. But the universe ran out of patience on that Thursday evening in early October. Victoria had come to Adrian's house for dinner. He'd cooked, badly, which was normal. His culinary skills peaked at pasta with jarred sauce and a salad that was mostly lettuce and optimism. Victoria teased him about it the way she teased him about everything, with precision and no malice. And they ate at the kitchen table while Ethan entertained himself with Legos in the living room. After dinner, Victoria helped with dishes. Adrian washed, she dried, and they talked about nothing important. A building she was considering acquiring, a parent at Ethan's school who had invited Adrian to a potluck and used the word synergy to describe the deviled eggs. "Synergy deviled eggs," Victoria repeated. "I need to meet this person." "No, you don't. She once described a bake sale as an opportunity for community-driven caloric investment." Victoria laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, the kind she only produced when Adrian caught her off balance. He loved that laugh. He was starting to love a lot of things about her, and each one felt like another brick in a wall he was building around a bomb. Around 8 o'clock, Ethan went to bed. Adrian read him a story, the dinosaur book Victoria had bought him, which had quickly become the only acceptable bedtime literature, and came back downstairs to find Victoria curled on the couch with her shoes off and her phone on the coffee table. "He's asleep?" she asked. "Halfway through the second page." New record. That book has powers. Adrian sat beside her, not touching, but close. The house was quiet in the way houses get when children fall asleep. A different quality of silence, fuller, more complete, as if the building itself was exhaling. I like this, Victoria said quietly. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the living room, the Lego towers on the carpet, the crayon drawings on the fridge, the pair of tiny sneakers by the front door with the laces still tied because Ethan refused to untie them, insisting it was faster to just pull. This feels real. It is real. I know. That's why I like it. She paused. My apartment doesn't feel like this. It's beautiful. It's expensive. It has a view that would make most people cry. And it feels like a hotel. I've lived there for 3 years and it still feels like I'm checking in. Adrian understood that. His penthouse downtown had the same problem. Technically his, emotionally vacant. This house, with its scuffed floors and Lego landmines and a refrigerator that hummed too loud, was the only place that felt like it had a heartbeat. You could come here more often, he said, and he meant it in a way that scared him. Victoria turned to look at him. Are you sure? I'm sure. She studied his face the way she always did, carefully, like she was reading a contract for hidden clauses. Then she leaned over, slowly, and kissed him. It was the first time either of them had crossed that line. 3 weeks of coffees and drives and late-night dinners and texts across time zones, and neither of them had so much as held hands. Not because the want wasn't there. It had been there since the restaurant doorway, humming under every conversation like a current neither of them acknowledged. But because they were both too careful, too damaged, too aware that crossing from friendship into something else meant there was no safe place to land if it went wrong. The kiss was short. Victoria pulled back first, but she didn't move away. She stayed close, her forehead nearly touching his, her breathing uneven in a way that told Adrian she was more rattled than she wanted to admit. I wasn't planning to do that, she said. I know. I don't do things without planning them. I know that too. Are you going to say anything other than I know? I'm trying to think of something, but my brain's not working very well right now. She almost smiled. Good. They sat like that for a while, close but not touching again, the space between them charged with something fragile and new. Adrian's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He ignored it. Victoria reached for her coffee, cold by now, and took a sip without complaining. Adrian, she said, I need to tell you something. Okay. I haven't been in a relationship in 4 years. The last one ended because he found out how much money I had, and it changed everything. He started planning things I hadn't agreed to. Vacations, investments, a house he wanted us to buy together that was really just a house he wanted me to buy for him. When I confronted him, he said I was being paranoid. When I ended it, he threatened to go to the press with personal details about my life. She set the coffee down. So I stopped. I stopped dating, stopped trusting, stopped letting anyone close enough to know anything about me that couldn't be found in a Bloomberg article. What changed? You. She said it simply, without drama. You walked into that restaurant in clothes that looked like you bought them at Target, and you paid my bill without knowing who I was, and you left without asking for anything. And I thought, okay, maybe this one isn't performing. The word hit Adrian like a fist. Performing. Because that's exactly what he'd been doing. Every date, every fake wallet incident, every Honda Civic ride to a restaurant he could have bought, it was all a performance. The only difference between Adrian and every other liar Victoria had encountered was that his performance went in the opposite direction. Instead of pretending to have more than he did, he pretended to have less. But the mechanism was identical. The deception was the same. He opened his mouth. The truth was right there, sitting on his tongue like a hot coal, ready to burn its way into the air between them. And then his phone rang again. Not a buzz this time, a full ring, the specific tone he'd assigned to his executive line, the one that only activated for calls from Meridian's senior leadership. Sorry, he said. I need to check that. He walked to the kitchen, picked up the phone, and saw Grace's name on the screen. Grace never called after 7 unless something was on fire, metaphorically or otherwise. He answered. What's wrong? The Yokohama deal is collapsing. Grace's voice was taut, professional, and stripped of everything except urgency. Tanaka's people are threatening to walk unless we renegotiate the port allocation by midnight Tokyo time. That gives us about 3 hours. Marcus is patching in the legal team now, but they need you on the call. I'll be on in 5 minutes. He paused. Route it through my secure line at home. And Grace, tell Marcus to hold the terms on sections 4 and 7. We don't give ground on port access. Not for Tanaka. Not for anyone. Understood. The preliminary figures from the Singapore office show a potential exposure of what was the projected quarterly impact if Tanaka walks. Roughly 800 million in delayed revenue. The shipping lanes through. Fine. Pull the contingency plan from the Melbourne expansion. We can redirect through. He stopped, because Victoria was standing in the kitchen doorway. She was leaning against the frame with her arms crossed, and her expression was not confused. It was not surprised. It was the expression of a woman who understood every word she'd just heard. The financial scale, the corporate urgency, the authority in his voice, and was rapidly reassembling every piece of information she'd ever been given about the man standing in front of her. Grace, I'll call you back, Adrian said. Adrian, we have 3 hours. I'll call you back. He hung up. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, Ethan shifted in his bed, and the springs creaked softly in the dark. Victoria didn't move. She stood in the doorway with her arms still crossed, and when she spoke, her voice was low and controlled in the way Adrian had heard her speak exactly once before, at the restaurant, when she'd asked the waiter to add the stranger's bill to her check. Calm, precise, final. 800 million, she said. Adrian said nothing. In delayed revenue. Silence. Port allocation negotiations with Tanaka, a secure line at home, a Singapore office. She uncrossed her arms. You're not an operations manager, are you? Victoria, are you? He looked at her. The woman who had paid a stranger's bill. The woman who had kissed him 10 minutes ago in a living room full of Legos. The woman who had told him about her last relationship, about the man who had used her, about the years of isolation she'd endured because she couldn't trust anyone to see her as more than a balance sheet. No, he said. I'm not. Who are you? My name is Adrian Cole. I'm the founder and sole owner of Meridian Logistics International. Victoria's face didn't change. That was the part that destroyed him. Not anger, not tears, not the explosive reaction he'd braced for. Her face simply went still, the way a screen goes dark when you shut it off. Everything behind it, the warmth, the vulnerability, the unguarded version of herself she'd spent weeks slowly revealing, disappeared behind a wall so thick and so fast that Adrian could almost hear it slam into place. Meridian, she said. Yes. The Meridian. The company that moved $4 billion in freight through the Pacific corridor last year. Yes. Worth what? 10? 12 billion? 11. She laughed. Not the laugh from 20 minutes ago, the real one, the one that came from somewhere genuine. This was the other laugh. Brittle, airless, the sound a person makes when something they suspected turns out to be true, and they wish it hadn't. $11 billion, she said, and you've been sitting across from me in a Target Henley telling me you work in operations. I do work in operations, I just don't. She held up her hand. Don't you dare minimize this. I'm not minimizing. You lied to me. From the first second we met, you lied to me. Every coffee, every dinner, every text message, every conversation where you let me believe you were someone you weren't. That was a lie. All of it. The feelings weren't a lie. You don't get to decide what parts are real. You don't get to build a relationship on a false foundation and then point to the roof and say, but look, the view is nice. The whole structure is compromised, Adrian. Every single piece of it. Her voice hadn't risen. That was what made it devastating. Victoria Hale didn't yell. She didn't need to. She spoke with the controlled fury of a woman who had spent her career dismantling arguments in boardrooms, and every word she said landed with the precision of a scalpel. I need you to listen to me, Adrian said. Please. I'm listening. I've been listening for 3 weeks. Apparently everything I heard was fiction. I started doing this before I met you, years before. It wasn't about you, it was about everyone. Every woman I went on a date with, I showed up as someone ordinary because I wanted to see who would stay when there was nothing to gain. Victoria stared at him. An experiment. A test. Same thing. She picked up her jacket from the back of the kitchen chair. You tested me. The way you tested all of them. Except I was stupid enough to actually fall for the performance. It stopped being a performance the moment I met you. Did it? Because you kept lying. You had weeks to tell me. You had opportunities. You sat across from me while I told you about my ex, the man who used me for my money. And you held my hand and you looked at me with those sympathetic eyes. And the whole time you were doing the exact same thing he did, just in reverse. That's not the same. It is the same. You manipulated my perception of who you are. You let me form an attachment to a version of you that doesn't exist. The Adrian I spent 3 weeks falling for, the modest, grounded, uncomplicated guy who cooks bad pasta and drives a Honda, he's not real. He's a costume you put on because you're too scared to let anyone see what's underneath. Adrian's jaw tightened. The words hurt in a way he hadn't been prepared for, not because they were cruel, but because they were accurate. Every sentence she spoke was a mirror, and the reflection was ugly. You're right, he said. You're right about all of it. I know I'm right. But I need you to understand why. Why? Because of Sophie. Because you lost your wife, and it broke you, and now you punish every woman who comes near you by making them prove their worth before you'll show them yours? She shook her head. I have my own grief, Adrian. I lost my mother. I know what it does, but I never used it as an excuse to lie to someone I cared about. I wasn't using it as an excuse. Then what were you using it as? A reason. A bad one. I know it was a bad one. Victoria pulled on her jacket. Her movements were precise, unhurried, the way she did everything, controlled even in the middle of falling apart. I told you that transparency mattered to me. I said those exact words. And you sat there and nodded and said, I'm real, and meant it with your whole chest while hiding $11 billion behind a wall you built to keep everyone out. I was going to tell you. When? Tonight, before the call. I was going to... That's convenient. It's the truth. You don't get to use that word anymore. Not tonight. She picked up her phone from the coffee table, slipped it into her jacket pocket, and walked toward the front door. I spent 4 years alone because the last person I trusted turned out to be a lie. And I let you in because I thought you were different, because you seemed like the one person who had no reason to pretend. She stopped at the door, her hand on the knob, and when she turned back, Adrian saw it. The fracture. Behind the composure, behind the corporate armor, behind the woman who controlled rooms and commanded billions, there was a person whose heart was breaking in real time, and she was furious at herself for letting it. The thing that kills me, she said, her voice finally cracking, just barely, just enough, is that you already knew what this kind of deception does. You've spent 2 years watching people fail your tests, watching them react to the fake version of you, judging them for not being good enough. And you never once considered that you were doing to them exactly what you were afraid someone would do to your son. You were pretending, you were manipulating, you were withholding the truth and then blaming other people for not responding to a reality that didn't exist. Adrian's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the kitchen counter to keep them still. You should have trusted me, Victoria said. Of all people, Adrian, of all the people in the world you could have been honest with, I was the one who would have understood. Because I know what it's like to wonder if anyone will ever see you instead of your money. I live in that question every single day. She opened the door. And you took that away from me. You took away the chance to choose you with full information, and you replaced it with a test I didn't know I was taking. She stepped through the doorway. Victoria. She didn't turn around. Victoria, please. Good night, Adrian. The door closed. Not a slam. Victoria Hale didn't slam doors. It clicked shut with a soft, definitive sound that was somehow worse than any slam could have been. Adrian stood alone in his kitchen. The pasta pot was still in the sink. The dish towel Victoria had used was folded neatly on the counter. 2 wine glasses sat on the table, one with a faint imprint of lipstick on the rim. His phone rang. Grace, the Yokohama deal. $800 million in delayed revenue and a team of lawyers waiting for him on a conference line. He answered the call. He spent 3 hours negotiating terms with Japanese executives. He was sharp, decisive, commanding. Everything Meridian's board expected him to be. He secured the deal. He saved the $800 million. He handled it the way he handled everything, with cold precision and complete control. And when it was over, when the call disconnected and the house went silent, and the only sound was the refrigerator humming its indifferent hum, Adrian sat at the kitchen table, in the chair Victoria had sat in 2 hours earlier, and pressed his hands against his face. The wine glass with her lipstick was still there. He reached for it, held it for a moment, and set it back down without moving it. The house felt different now, smaller and larger at the same time, full of the absence of someone who had only been there a handful of times but had somehow left an imprint on every room she'd touched. He didn't clean up. He didn't go to bed. He sat in the kitchen until the sky outside the window began to lighten, and the only thing that moved him was the sound of Ethan's footsteps upstairs at 6 in the morning, padding toward the bathroom, then padding to the top of the stairs. "Dad?" Adrian wiped his face, straightened his back. "Down here, buddy." Ethan appeared at the bottom of the stairs, still in his pajamas, the stuffed dinosaur dragging behind him by one arm. His hair was sticking up in 4 different directions, and there was a crease on his cheek from sleeping on a wrinkled pillowcase. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" Ethan asked. Adrian looked at his son, 6 years old, the same eyes as Sophie, the same frown. "Just thinking," Adrian said. "About what?" "About how fear becomes a habit. About how the walls you build to keep people out are the same walls that keep you trapped inside. About a woman who walked out of his house and took something with her that he didn't know how to name and wasn't sure he deserved to get back." "About breakfast," Adrian said. "What do you want?" "Pancakes." "Pancakes it is." He stood up, turned on the lights, and started cooking, and if his hands were still shaking while he measured the flour, Ethan was kind enough not to notice. The pancakes were terrible. Too much baking powder, not enough salt, and Adrian had forgotten to grease the pan, so the first 3 came out looking like something you'd find stuck to the bottom of a shoe. Ethan ate them anyway, drenched in enough syrup to qualify as a beverage, and declared them okay but not as good as Grandma's, which was fair. Adrian sat across from him and drank coffee and pretended to be fine. He was not fine. Victoria's absence was immediate and total. No text that morning, no missed call, no email routed through Claire's office with a dry one-liner about grilled cheese or staring contests. The silence had a texture to it, heavy, deliberate, the kind of silence that communicates more than words. He didn't reach out, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew that reaching out now, before he'd earned the right, would be one more act of selfishness dressed up as courage. Victoria hadn't asked him to fight for her. She'd asked him to be honest, and he'd failed, and the consequence of failure was this: a kitchen table with one empty chair and a 6-year-old who kept glancing at the spot where Victoria usually sat. "Is Victoria coming over today?" Ethan asked, a piece of pancake balanced on his fork like a small soggy flag. "Not today, bud." "Tomorrow?" "I don't think so." "Why?" "Because I lied to her. Because I was so afraid of being used that I turned myself into someone who uses other people. Because the woman I was falling in love with looked me in the eyes and told me exactly what she needed, and I chose to protect myself instead." "She's busy," Adrian said. "Work stuff." Ethan accepted this with the casual indifference of a child who hadn't yet learned that adults use busy the way they use fine, as a wall. He went back to his pancakes, and Adrian went back to his coffee, and the morning continued in the shape of a normal morning, which made its wrongness harder to bear. The days that followed were brutal in their ordinariness. Adrian went to work. He sat in meetings, he approved contracts, reviewed quarterly reports, and made decisions that affected thousands of employees across a dozen countries. He was good at it, maybe better than usual, because the part of his brain that would normally be occupied with something other than work was now empty, and the emptiness made room for a ruthless focus that his executive team found impressive and Grace found alarming. "You haven't left the building before 9 p.m. in 4 days," Grace said on Monday afternoon, standing in his office doorway with her arms crossed. "You skipped lunch twice. You snapped at the head of European operations, which, granted, he deserved it, but you don't snap. You calculate. Something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong." You're doing the thing. What thing? The thing where you work yourself into the ground because it's easier than feeling something. Adrian looked up from his screen. Grace had been with him long enough to know when she was right, and she was right now, and they both knew it, and the knowing hung in the air between them like smoke. I'm fine, Grace. You're not fine, but you're my boss, so I can't make you talk about it. She set a paper bag on his desk. Turkey sandwich, eat it, and go home before 8 tonight, or I'm calling your mother. You wouldn't. Try me. He ate the sandwich. He went home at 8:15, which was close enough to count. Marcus called on Tuesday. Adrian let it go to voicemail. Marcus called again on Wednesday. Adrian let it go again. On Thursday, Marcus showed up at the office unannounced, walked past Grace without stopping, and sat down in the chair across from Adrian's desk with the settled posture of a man who is not leaving. Talk, Marcus said. I'm in the middle of... You're in the middle of avoiding me. You've been avoiding everyone. Grace says you've been working 18-hour days and eating like a grad student. Your mom says Ethan asked her why Dad looked sad. So talk. Adrian set his pen down. He looked at Marcus, his best friend, the person who had carried him through the worst year of his life, the person who knew him better than anyone except possibly his mother, and felt the full weight of what had happened settle onto his shoulders. Victoria found out, he said. Marcus didn't react immediately. He sat with it, processing, the way he processed everything, methodically, without rushing to judgment. Found out what specifically? Everything. She overheard a call with Grace about the Yokohama deal, $800 million in delayed revenue, port allocations, the Singapore office. She's a CEO, Marcus. She understood every word. What did she say? She said I tested her. She said I manipulated her perception. She said I did to her exactly what her ex did, pretended to be something I wasn't so I could control the outcome. Adrian paused. She was right. Marcus exhaled slowly. Where is she now? Gone. Haven't heard from her since Thursday night. Have you tried calling? No. Why not? Because she asked me for one thing. Transparency. And I gave her the opposite. I don't get to chase her down and make this about what I want. She trusted me, and I broke it. The least I can do is respect her decision. Marcus leaned forward. Okay, I hear you, and I respect the self-awareness, but I need to push back on something. Go ahead. You said she was right, and she was. About the lying, about the manipulation, about all of it. But there's a piece you're missing. The reason you lied to Victoria is the same reason you've been lying to everyone for 2 years. It's not because you're a bad person. It's because you're a scared one. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't. But it makes it fixable. Scared is fixable. Dishonest on purpose, manipulative for sport, that's different. That's character. You don't have a character problem, Adrian. You have a grief problem that turned into a trust problem that turned into a control problem. And the only way out of it is to stop controlling and start being honest, even when it costs you something. Adrian was quiet for a long time. The office hummed around them. The distant clatter of keyboards, a phone ringing somewhere on the floor below, the massive glass windows reflecting a city that didn't know or care about any of this. I don't know how to fix this, Adrian said. I've been building this system for so long that I don't know how to take it apart. Start with one brick. Marcus stood up. Call her. Not to win her back. Not to convince her. Just to say what's true. The whole truth. With no strategy behind it. If she listens, great. If she doesn't, at least you'll know you stopped hiding. Marcus left. Adrian sat alone in his office and stared at his phone and thought about bricks. That weekend, something happened that cracked him open in a way he hadn't expected. It was Saturday afternoon. Adrian and Ethan were at the park. The same park where Victoria had brought the octopus kite. And Ethan was playing on the swings while Adrian sat on a bench and pretended to read something on his phone. A woman sat down on the bench next to him. She had a toddler on her hip and a diaper bag the size of a small country. She looked exhausted in the specific way parents of toddlers look exhausted. Not sleepy, but fundamentally depleted, like someone had opened a valve somewhere and all the energy had drained out. Which one's yours? She asked, nodding toward the playground. The one trying to jump off the swing at maximum height. Bold strategy. He calls it flying. I call it a trip to the emergency room. She laughed. The toddler grabbed her hair and she detached his fist with practiced ease. My husband's at work. Saturdays. Every Saturday for the last 3 months. She said it casually, but there was an edge underneath. Is your wife around, or are you flying solo today? Solo. It's just me and him. Divorced? Widowed. Her face changed. The casual park bench friendliness shifted into something softer, more careful. I'm sorry. It's okay. It was a while ago. Does he remember her? Adrian watched Ethan pump his legs on the swing, gaining height with each arc, fearless in the way only 6-year-olds can be. Not really. He was 2 when she passed. He knows her from photos and from what I tell him, but he doesn't have memories, not the kind he can feel. That's hard. It is. The woman adjusted the toddler on her hip. Can I ask you something personal? You don't have to answer. Sure. Are you seeing anyone? The question shouldn't have hit as hard as it did, but it landed somewhere unprotected, somewhere between the ribs where Adrian had been carefully not feeling anything for the past week. I was, he said, recently. It didn't work out. What happened? And because she was a stranger, and because strangers sometimes get the truth that friends and family don't, Adrian said, I wasn't honest with her about who I am. I was so worried about getting hurt that I hid the real version of myself and showed her a version I thought was safer. And when she found out, she left. Because she deserved better than a man who was too afraid to be real. The woman looked at him for a moment, then she said, My husband works every Saturday because he's afraid that if he's home, he'll have to deal with the fact that we're not happy. He works because it's easier than sitting in the same room with me and admitting that something's wrong. She bounced the toddler absently. People hide in all kinds of ways. Some people hide in work. Some people hide in lies. The question isn't why you hid. The question is whether you're done hiding. A toddler's fist grabbed her hair again. She stood up, wrestled the small hand free, and said, Good luck with whatever you decide. Then she walked toward the sandbox, and Adrian sat on the bench and watched Ethan fly. Are you done hiding? He thought about that question for the rest of the day. He thought about it while Ethan built a fort out of couch cushions. He thought about it while making dinner, grilled cheese, which reminded him of Victoria and the diner and the night she'd eaten his fries without asking. He thought about it while reading Ethan the dinosaur book for the 47th time. And he thought about it at 9 o'clock that night, sitting in the living room after Ethan fell asleep, when he finally picked up his phone and called Victoria's personal number. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He didn't know what to say, and whatever he said needed to be said face to face, with no phone between them and no safe distance to retreat to. The next morning, Sunday, he drove to Victoria's office building. He knew she worked Sundays. She'd told him once, during one of their late-night phone calls, that Sunday was her favorite workday because the building was empty and she could think without interruption. The lobby was deserted except for a security guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Adrian approached the desk. I need to see Victoria Hale. The guard barely looked up. Do you have an appointment? No. Then I can't let you up. My name is Adrian Cole. Could you call her office and tell her I'm here? The guard studied him with the particular suspicion of someone who'd been trained to say no to everyone, but he picked up the phone, dialed, and spoke quietly into the receiver. A minute later, he hung up. 32nd floor. She said you have 10 minutes. Adrian took the elevator up. The doors opened into a floor that looked like the inside of a magazine. Glass walls, clean lines, the kind of deliberate minimalism that costs more than excess. Claire was not at her desk. The hallway was empty. A single office at the end had its light on. He walked toward it. Victoria was standing behind her desk, not sitting. She wore jeans and a sweater, which was so far from her usual corporate armor that it startled him. Her hair was in the same uneven bun from the night they'd met. She looked tired. Not the performative tiredness of someone who works too hard and wants you to notice, but the real kind. The kind that comes from not sleeping well, from turning thoughts over in the dark until they wear grooves into your brain. 10 minutes, she said. I won't need that long. Then talk. Adrian stood in the doorway of her office and looked at the woman he had hurt and said the only thing that mattered. I was wrong. Not just about lying to you. About all of it. The dates, the tests, the fake identity. I spent 2 years pretending to be someone ordinary because I was terrified of letting anyone see who I really am. Not the money, not the company, me. The person behind all of it who lost his wife and didn't know how to grieve without turning it into a fortress. Victoria didn't move. Her arms were at her sides, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on him with the same intensity she'd had in the restaurant doorway the night they met. You told me that transparency matters to you, Adrian continued, and I nodded and agreed and then went right on being opaque. You told me about your ex and what he did, and instead of hearing it as a warning, I heard it as proof that my system was working, because I was lying in the opposite direction, and I convinced myself that somehow made it different. It doesn't. Lying is lying. Manipulation is manipulation, and you deserved none of it. I know I deserved none of it. I know you know. I'm not here to tell you things you already understand. I'm here to tell you things about me that I should have said from the beginning. He stepped into the office. Not far, just past the threshold, just enough to be in the room without crowding her. My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 32 years old. I have a son named Ethan, who is the best thing I've ever done. I own a company worth $11 billion, and I drive a Honda Civic to restaurants because I'm so afraid of being wanted for the wrong reasons that I turn my entire life into an audition where everyone fails. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I didn't test you because I thought you were like everyone else. I tested you because that's all I know how to do. It's the only way I've interacted with women since Sophie died. It's muscle memory. It's the default setting on a machine I built to protect my son and ended up using to protect myself. He paused. But you weren't a test. Not after the first 5 minutes. You were the person who made me realize the machine was broken. And yet you kept it running. Yes. For 3 weeks. Yes. Why? Because I was a coward. Because every day I didn't tell you was a day I got to keep you, and I wanted to keep you more than I wanted to be honest. And that's the worst reason in the world. And I know it. Victoria walked around her desk. She stopped about 5 feet from him, close enough that he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped each other in front of her body, like she was physically holding herself together. Do you know what I did after I left your house? She asked. No. I drove home. I sat in my apartment, the one that feels like a hotel, and I pulled up every article I could find about Meridian Logistics International. Your company, your empire. And I read about the man who built it from a single warehouse at 24, who grew it into one of the largest freight companies in the world without ever putting his name on a press release, who is, by every objective measure, one of the most private and successful business leaders in the country. She paused. And I felt like an idiot, because all the signs were there. The way you talked about your work, the precision, the scope, the way you understood international markets without ever seeming to try. I should have known, but I didn't want to know. I wanted you to be what you said you were, because what you said you were felt safe. I'm sorry. I'm not finished. Her voice hardened. You let me fall for a fiction. You let me open up to a man who didn't exist. And the real man, the one standing in front of me right now, I don't know him. I know pieces. I know he loves his son. I know he makes terrible pancakes and drives a car that's older than some of his employees, but I don't know what he looks like when he's not performing. I've never seen him. You're seeing him right now. Am I? Or is this another version? The apologetic version, the vulnerable version, the version designed to get me back? The accusation was a knife, and it cut deep because there was truth in it. Adrian had spent so long calibrating versions of himself for different audiences that he no longer trusted his own sincerity. Was this real? Was he standing in this office because he genuinely wanted to be honest? Or because he'd calculated that honesty was the strategy most likely to work? He didn't know, and the not knowing was the most honest thing about him. I can't prove that this is real, he said. I know that. I've destroyed every reason you have to believe me. I can't offer evidence or guarantees or anything that would hold up in the court of a woman who's been lied to by someone she trusted. All I can do is stand here and tell you the truth and accept whatever you do with it. Victoria looked at him for a long, terrible, endless moment. Her eyes were bright, not with tears exactly, but with the effort of holding them back, the muscular exertion of a person who refuses to cry in front of someone who has hurt them. I need time, she said. Okay? I'm not saying yes and I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need time to figure out whether the parts of you I fell for are real or whether they were just the most convincing pieces of the performance. That's fair. And I need you to not call me, not text me, not show up at my office. If I decide I want to talk to you again, I'll reach out. And if I don't, I need you to respect that. I will. She nodded. Then she walked back behind her desk and sat down, and the gesture was unmistakable. The meeting was over. The CEO was back. The woman who had kissed him in a living room full of Legos had retreated behind the glass walls and clean lines of her professional self. Adrian turned toward the door. He was halfway through it when she spoke again. Adrian, he stopped. The pancakes really were terrible. He turned back. She wasn't smiling, not quite, but there was something in her face that hadn't been there when he walked in. A crack in the wall. Thin, barely visible, but present. I know, he said. He left the building. He got in the Honda Civic, the ridiculous, dented, deliberately ordinary Honda Civic that represented everything wrong with the way he'd been living, and he sat in the parking lot for a long time. His hands were steady, his breathing was even. He didn't feel better. Not exactly. He felt scraped out, hollowed, like someone had taken a spoon to his insides and removed everything that wasn't essential. But underneath the emptiness, buried so deep he almost missed it, there was something else, something clean and raw and unfamiliar. He had told the truth, the whole truth, with no strategy behind it. For the first time in years, someone had seen the real Adrian Cole, not the billionaire, not the ordinary man, not the grieving widower or the protective father or the corporate machine, just the person, flawed and frightened and desperate and honest. And she hadn't slammed the door. She'd said she needed time. Time Adrian could give. He'd spent 4 years giving it to grief. He could spend whatever was necessary giving it to something better. He started the car and drove home to his son. 2 weeks passed. Adrian kept his promise. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't drive past her building, didn't ask Claire for updates. He existed in the silence the way a man exists in a room after the furniture has been removed. Aware of every empty space, conscious of what used to fill it, unable to do anything except stand there and adjust. But the silence changed him. Not in the dramatic, overnight way that stories like to pretend transformation happens. No sudden epiphany in the shower, no tearful monologue in front of a mirror. It changed him the way weather changes stone, slowly, constantly, through the accumulated pressure of small daily confrontations with who he actually was. The first thing he did was sell the Honda Civic. He didn't make a ceremony of it. He drove it to a dealership on a Tuesday afternoon, signed the paperwork, and accepted a check that was laughably small for a man of his means. The salesman, a kid in his 20s with an aggressive smile, tried to upsell him on a new model. Adrian declined, called a car service, and went home. He told Marcus about it over lunch the next day. "You sold the Civic," Marcus said, setting down his fork. "This morning." "The undercover car, the one you've been driving to dates for 2 years. "That's the one." "Why?" "Because it was a costume, and I'm done wearing costumes." Marcus studied him for a moment, the way a doctor studies a patient who's reported an improvement and the doctor isn't sure whether to believe it. "What are you driving now?" "I took a car service today. I'll figure the rest out later." "You could drive the Porsche, the one that's been sitting in your garage collecting dust since you bought it 3 years ago." "Maybe." "Maybe?" Marcus shook his head. "Do you hear yourself? You own a $200,000 sports car and you're saying maybe, like it's a decision that requires a committee. It's not about the car, it's about what the car means. If I start driving the Porsche, I'm the guy with the Porsche. If I take a car service, I'm the guy being driven around. Every option comes with a story attached to it, and I'm tired of engineering what story people see. So just pick the one that's true. That's what I'm trying to do." The second thing he did was harder. He told Ethan. Not everything. Ethan was 6, and 6-year-olds didn't need to know about billion-dollar empires or romantic failures or the existential mechanics of adult deception. But Adrian had been building a wall between his real life and the life his son saw, and some of those walls needed to come down. He started small. One evening, after dinner, he sat Ethan on the couch and said, "Hey buddy, I want to show you something." He pulled up a photo on his tablet, the Meridian headquarters building, the glass tower downtown that Ethan had never seen because Adrian had never taken him there. See that building? It's big. That's where Dad works. Ethan looked at the photo, then looked at Adrian, then looked back at the photo. I thought you worked in a little office. I used to tell people that, but the truth is, I work there, in that big building, and a lot of people work there with me. How many? A lot. Thousands. Ethan's eyes widened. Are you the boss? Yeah, bud, I'm the boss. Of the whole building. Of the whole building. Ethan considered this with the solemn gravity of a child processing new information about a parent, which is to say he stared at the photo for about 4 seconds and then said, Can I come visit? Anytime you want. Does it have a snack machine? 3 of them. Cool. And that was it. No follow-up questions about net worth, no confusion about why Dad had been hiding it, no childhood trauma requiring years of therapy. Ethan absorbed it the way children absorb most adult information, as one more piece of a world that didn't fully make sense yet and probably never would. But the conversation mattered to Adrian more than he could articulate, because telling Ethan the truth, even a simplified, age-appropriate version of it, was the first time he'd been honest about his life without calculating the reaction in advance. He'd just said it. And the sky hadn't fallen. The third thing he did was the hardest of all. He sat down with his mother. Linda came over on a Thursday evening. Ethan was at a play date, and the house was quiet in the way it only got when the 6-year-old tornado was elsewhere. Adrian made tea, badly, because he was worse at tea than he was at pancakes, and sat across from his mother at the kitchen table. I need to talk to you about something, he said. Linda wrapped her hands around her mug and looked at him with the particular patience of a woman who had been waiting for this conversation for 2 years. I'm listening. You were right. About all of it. The dates, the fake wallet, the Honda Civic. You told me I wasn't happy, and I told you I was. And I was lying. I've been lying to everyone, including myself. Linda sipped her tea. I know. I know you know. I'm not telling you because it's news. I'm telling you because I need to say it out loud to someone who loves me and won't let me talk my way around it. Is this about Victoria? Adrian nodded. She found out about who I am, about the company, the money, all of it. She walked out, and she was right to walk out. And I've been sitting in this house for 2 weeks trying to figure out how I got here. Linda set her mug down. I'll tell you how you got here. You got here the same way your father got to where he ended up, by confusing protection with control. Adrian went still. His mother almost never mentioned his father. Richard Cole had left when Adrian was 11. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just gradually, the way a man leaves when he's been emotionally absent for so long that the physical departure is a formality. He'd moved to Arizona, remarried, and maintained the kind of relationship with Adrian that consisted of birthday cards and annual phone calls that neither of them enjoyed. Dad wasn't protecting anyone, Adrian said. He thought he was. He worked 80 hours a week because he told himself it was for us, for the family, for our future. And every hour he spent at the office was an hour he didn't have to spend sitting with the fact that he didn't know how to be a husband or a father. The work wasn't the problem. The work was the hiding place. Linda paused. You don't hide in work, you hide in lies. Different costume, same mechanism. I'm not Dad. No, you're not. You're a better father than he ever was, and you're more self-aware, and you actually love your son in a way he was never capable of. But you inherited his instinct. When things get scary, you build a bunker and call it safety. Adrian stared at his tea. It was too strong and slightly bitter, like everything he made in the kitchen. Victoria's not the first person you've pushed away, Linda continued. She's just the first one who mattered enough to make you notice the pushing. She mattered. I know she did. I could see it. When you talked about her, your face did something it hasn't done since Sophie. It opened up. He felt the familiar stab at Sophie's name, not the devastating, floor-dropping grief of the first year, but the older, quieter version that lived in him like a scar, present, permanent, no longer bleeding but never fully healed. Sophie would have hated what I've been doing, he said. Sophie would have thrown the Honda Civic keys at your head. Adrian laughed. It came out rough and unexpected, more exhalation than sound, and it hurt in the way laughter sometimes does when it's mixed with too many other things. She would have, though, he said. She would have. And then she would have told you to go find Victoria and tell her the truth and stop being an idiot. Linda reached across the table and put her hand over his. You don't owe it to Sophie's memory to be alone forever. You owe it to her memory to be the man she married. Honest, brave, and willing to be vulnerable even when it terrifies you. Adrian looked at his mother's hand on his. Small, lined, steady. The same hand that had held him together when Sophie died, that had made Ethan breakfast every morning for a year while Adrian could barely get out of bed, that had never once wavered even when her son was falling apart. What if she doesn't come back? He asked, and his voice cracked, just slightly on the last word. Then she doesn't come back. And it will hurt, and you'll survive it. But at least you'll survive it as yourself, not as whatever character you've been playing. They sat together for a while, not speaking, drinking bad tea in a kitchen that still smelled faintly of the pancakes Adrian had burned 2 weeks ago. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no crescendo, no triumphant music, no feeling of completion. It was just a mother and her son sitting at a table, which is sometimes enough. Ethan's school held a fall festival the following Saturday. Adrian had known about it for weeks. There were flyers on the fridge, emails from the PTA, a hand-decorated invitation Ethan had made in class using an alarming amount of glitter. The festival was an annual event, games, crafts, a bake sale, and a talent show where children performed with the specific confidence of people who have not yet learned embarrassment. Ethan was performing. He'd been practicing a magic trick for 3 weeks, a card trick specifically that he'd learned from a YouTube video and executed with the technical precision of someone who had no idea how the trick actually worked. The cards went everywhere. The magic words changed every time. The reveal consistently failed. Ethan thought it was the greatest trick ever performed. Adrian arrived at the school at 10 in the morning, holding a plate of cookies he'd bought from a bakery and transferred to a disposable container so they'd look homemade. He was not proud of this deception, but he was also not willing to subject Ethan's classmates to his actual baking. The gymnasium was chaotic in the way school events are always chaotic. Too many children, too few adults, a sound system that produced feedback every 30 seconds, and a face painting station that had already turned 3 kids into unrecognizable swamp creatures. Adrian found a seat near the front, saved a spot for Linda, and watched Ethan run around the gym with the wild, purposeless energy of a 6-year-old who has been told to wait patiently and has interpreted that instruction as sprint. Linda arrived at 10:15. She sat next to Adrian, assessed the cookie situation immediately, and said, "Bakery? I don't know what you're talking about. Those are perfectly uniform chocolate chip cookies. You can't make a pancake, Adrian." "Maybe I've improved." "You haven't." She took a cookie. "They're good, though." The talent show started at 11. A girl named Sophia sang a pop song with the volume and conviction of someone performing at a stadium. A boy named Marcus, a coincidence that made Adrian smile, played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on a recorder with a level of enthusiasm that compensated for his complete lack of pitch. Twin sisters performed a dance routine that was mostly just running in circles, but the audience clapped as though they'd witnessed something transcendent. Ethan was 5th. He walked to the front of the gymnasium with his deck of cards and a grin that took up most of his face, and Adrian felt the particular terror of a parent watching their child stand in front of a crowd, wanting so badly for it to go well, and knowing he couldn't control any of it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan announced, his voice too close to the microphone, producing a shriek of feedback that made everyone wince. He stepped back, adjusted, and tried again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do a magic trick." He held up the deck of cards. He asked a parent in the front row to pick a card, any card. The parent chose one, showed it to the audience, and put it back. Ethan shuffled the deck with the grace of a person shuffling laundry, dropping several cards on the floor in the process. He picked them up, reshuffled, and then held up a card with supreme confidence. "Is this your card?" "No," the parent said. Ethan frowned. He held up another card. "This one?" "No." He held up a third. "How about this one?" "That's the one." The gymnasium erupted. Parents clapped, kids cheered, and Ethan took a bow so deep his forehead nearly hit the floor. Adrian clapped until his hand stung, and Linda wiped her eyes with a napkin, and for a few seconds, everything was exactly right. And then Adrian saw her. Victoria was standing near the back of the gymnasium, by the door, half hidden behind a column of balloons that some PTA volunteer had arranged with more ambition than skill. She was wearing jeans and a dark jacket, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she was watching Ethan with an expression that Adrian had never seen on her face before. It was not the corporate mask. It was not the careful neutrality she wore in boardrooms and business dinners. It was not even the unguarded warmth she'd shown during their best moments together. It was something rawer than all of those. The expression of a person who has walked into a room they weren't sure they should enter and found something there that made them glad they did. Adrian's chest tightened. He didn't move. He didn't wave or stand or cross the room. He just sat in his folding chair in the second row and looked at her, and she looked at the stage where Ethan was still bowing, and the gymnasium hummed around both of them with the noise and chaos of children who didn't know that anything important was happening. Ethan spotted her first. He'd jumped off the stage and was running toward Adrian for his post-performance assessment when his eyes caught something near the back of the room, and his entire body changed direction with the abrupt physics of a 6-year-old encountering something more interesting. "Victoria!" He sprinted across the gymnasium, dodging parents, leaping over a toddler, nearly colliding with the face-painting station, and crashed into Victoria's legs with enough force to stagger her backward. "You came," he said, looking up at her with the unfiltered joy of a child who does not understand subtext or complicated adult emotions and simply knows that someone he likes is here. "Did you see my trick?" Victoria looked down at him. Adrian watched her face, watched the walls she'd built flex and fracture and strain against the pressure of a 6-year-old's smile. "I saw it," she said. "You were amazing." "I messed up the first 2 cards. That's called misdirection. It's an advanced technique." Ethan's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really. Professional magicians do it on purpose." "I did it on purpose." "I could tell." Ethan grabbed her hand. "Come sit with us. Dad's up front. He brought cookies, but Grandma says they're from a store." Victoria's eyes lifted from Ethan and found Adrian across the room. The distance between them was about 40 feet, past the bake sale table, past the balloon column, past all the other parents and children and noise and mess. 40 feet of gymnasium floor that might as well have been 40 miles. Adrian stood up. He didn't walk toward her. He just stood, so she could see him, so she could make the decision without feeling pursued. Victoria looked at him. He looked at her. And the world reduced itself, the way it sometimes does, to 2 people and the space between them and the question of whether that space is going to shrink or grow. Ethan tugged her hand. "Come on." Victoria let herself be pulled. She walked across the gymnasium with Ethan attached to her arm like a small, determined anchor, and she sat in the folding chair next to Adrian, the one he'd saved for Linda, who had watched this entire exchange and had already moved 3 seats down with the smooth, tactical instincts of a woman who knows exactly when to disappear. "Hi," Adrian said. "Hi. You're here." "I'm here." Ethan climbed into the chair between them. "Victoria, watch. I'm going to do the trick again." "Right now?" "Right now." He produced the deck of cards from his pocket, crumpled, held together with a rubber band that was clearly Ethan's own innovation, and began shuffling with furious concentration. Victoria looked over Ethan's head at Adrian. "I came to watch him," she said quietly. "I called your mother. She told me about the festival." "She didn't tell me." "I asked her not to." Ethan held up a card. "Is this your card?" "I didn't pick one yet," Victoria said. "Oh, okay, pick one." While Ethan reset the trick with the methodical seriousness of a surgeon, Victoria spoke quietly enough that only Adrian could hear. "I've spent 2 weeks thinking about what you said in my office, and I've gone back and forth so many times that I feel like I've worn a track in my own brain. One day I'm furious. The next day I miss you so much I can't sleep. The day after that, I'm furious again." She paused. "And then your mother called and told me Ethan was doing a magic show, and I realized I didn't want to miss it, Not because of you, because of him. Adrian nodded. He didn't speak because this was not a moment for him to talk. This was a moment for him to listen with everything he had. I watched him just now, Victoria continued, up on that stage, getting the card wrong twice and not caring, bowing like he'd just performed at Carnegie Hall. And I thought, that's what honesty looks like. A 6-year-old who doesn't know how to be anything other than exactly who he is. She looked at Ethan, who was now dealing cards onto the folding chair seat with elaborate concentration. I want that. I want to be around someone who isn't performing. And I think maybe that's what you were trying to tell me in my office, that you want to stop performing too. I do. Prove it. How? Pick a card. She gestured at Ethan's messy spread. Be a person, not a strategy, not a version, just a person sitting in a folding chair at his kid's school, eating store-bought cookies and watching a magic show. Adrian picked a card. It was the 7 of Hearts. He showed it to Victoria, who showed it to Ethan, who shuffled the deck, dropped half of it on the floor, picked it up, and held up a card. Is this your card? It was the 3 of Clubs. That's the one, Adrian said. Ethan pumped his fist. I knew it. He looked at Victoria. Did you see that? I got it on the first try. First try, Victoria confirmed. I'm getting really good at this. You really are. Ethan ran off to find Jalen, leaving the deck of cards scattered across 2 folding chairs and the floor beneath them. Adrian and Victoria sat side by side in the mild wreckage, surrounded by the sounds of other people's children and the aftermath of a talent show that nobody would remember in a year. I'm not ready to be where we were, Victoria said. I can't just step back into what we had. The trust isn't there yet. I know. But I don't want to lose this. She gestured vaguely at the gymnasium, at Ethan, who was now demonstrating his trick to a visibly confused Jalen, at Linda, who was pretending to read her phone while obviously watching everything, at the whole loud, imperfect, chaotic scene. I don't want to lose any of this. You don't have to. Then we start over. Not from the beginning. I don't want to pretend we haven't been through what we've been through, but from here, from this gymnasium, from the real versions of who we are. She turned to face him fully. No tests, no costumes, no Honda Civic. I sold the Honda Civic. Your mother told me. Did she also tell you about the cookies? She mentioned it. Adrian smiled. It felt different from the smiles he'd been practicing for 2 years. The warm but not eager, confident but not polished smiles he'd calibrated for blind dates and fake first impressions. This one was crooked and uncertain and about as far from controlled as a smile can get. Victoria noticed. That's new, she said. What is? That face. You look like you don't know what you're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. Good. And for the first time in 2 weeks, Victoria smiled back. It was a small smile, cautious, provisional, the kind of smile that's testing the ground before committing its full weight. But it was real, and Adrian felt it in his chest like a key turning in a lock. They spent the rest of the festival together. Not touching, not holding hands, not performing for each other or anyone else. They sat in folding chairs and watched children sing off-key and eat too much sugar and cry for reasons that were urgent and then forgotten 5 minutes later. Victoria bought a cupcake from the bake sale and declared it adequate, which Adrian now understood was the highest compliment she gave to food she hadn't personally selected. Ethan came back 4 times, once to show them a sticker he'd won, once to ask if worms had feelings, again, once to report that Jalen could now burp the alphabet backward, and once just to lean against Victoria's knee for a moment before running off again. That last one, the lean, was the moment that broke Adrian open. Because Ethan didn't lean against people he didn't trust. He was selective about physical contact in the way some children are, generous with hugs for the people he loved, and politely distant with everyone else. And he leaned against Victoria's knee the way he leaned against Adrian's or Linda's, casually, without thought, the way you lean against something you know will hold you up. Victoria's hand hovered over Ethan's hair for a second. Then she touched it, lightly, and Ethan didn't notice because he was already running, and Victoria looked at Adrian with something in her eyes that wasn't quite forgiveness, but was the thing that comes right before it. They walked to the parking lot together after the festival ended. Ethan was between them, holding both their hands, swinging slightly with each step. "Dad?" Ethan said. "Yeah? Can Victoria come to our house for dinner?" Adrian looked at Victoria over his son's head. "That's up to her." "I could eat," Victoria said. "Can you make the pasta?" Ethan asked Adrian. "The one with the red sauce?" "Sure." "And can Victoria bring the dinosaur book? I left it at Grandma's, but Victoria has one too." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I don't have a dinosaur book." "You should get one. They're really good. The T-Rex eats everything." "So I've heard." They drove home in Adrian's new car. Not the Porsche, not the Civic, but a mid-range SUV he'd bought 3 days ago because it had good safety ratings and enough trunk space for Lego collections and octopus kites. It was not a statement. It was not a costume. It was just a car. Victoria rode in the passenger seat. Ethan sat in the back, narrating the entire drive with a running commentary on every building, tree, and dog they passed. Victoria listened to all of it with the focused attention she usually reserved for earnings reports and board presentations. At the house, Adrian cooked. The pasta was only slightly better than usual. The sauce was still from a jar. The salad was still mostly lettuce. But Victoria ate it without complaint, and Ethan ate it with enough Parmesan cheese to constitute a health concern. After dinner, after Ethan's bath and the bedtime story and the hallway light negotiation and the 45 seconds of quiet that followed the closing of a child's door, Adrian and Victoria stood in the kitchen and looked at each other. "Thank you for coming," Adrian said. "Thank you for not lying." Low bar. "It's the bar you set. I'm just holding you to it." He nodded. "Fair enough. Can I say something?" "Go ahead." "I'm going to do this differently, not just with you, with everything. No more tests, no more fake identities, no more screening people through a system I designed because I was too scared to just be myself and see what happened. It doesn't mean I'm not scared. I'm terrified. But I'd rather be terrified and honest than safe and fake." Victoria leaned against the counter. "I'm going to hold you to that too." "I know. And I'm going to be difficult about it. I'm going to have days where I don't trust you, where something you say reminds me of the lie, and I pull back. That's going to happen, and I need you to not take it personally and not panic and not build another wall." "I can do that." "Can you?" "I don't know, but I'm going to try. And when I mess up, because I will, I'll tell you. I won't hide it or manage it or turn it into another strategy. I'll just say, I messed up, and we'll figure it out." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My therapist is going to love this." "Your therapist?" "I've been seeing someone for 6 years. Best decision I ever made. You should consider it." "Therapy?" "You're a man who built a fake identity to cope with grief and used it for 2 years across multiple relationships." "Yes, Adrian, therapy." He almost laughed. She was right, of course. She was always right. Not in the way that was annoying, but in the way that was necessary. The way a compass is right when you've been walking in circles and need someone to point north. "I'll make an appointment," he said. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow." She picked up her jacket. It was late. Not midnight diner late, but late enough that the house had settled into its nighttime sounds, the ones Adrian knew by heart. The tick of the heating system, the distant hum of the refrigerator, Ethan's bed creaking as he shifted in his sleep. At the door, Victoria paused. She turned back and looked at him. Really looked, the way she had in the restaurant doorway the night they met. The look that had started everything. The look that said, "I'm trying to decide if you're real." "The man in the restaurant," she said, "the one in the navy button-down who paid my bill and walked away. Was any of him real?" "All of him," Adrian said. "Except the part where he pretended he couldn't afford the dinner. That's the part I'm trying to forgive." "I know." She nodded. Then she stepped forward and hugged him. Not a kiss. They weren't there yet, and both of them knew it. A hug. Brief, firm, the kind that communicates presence without making promises. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Victoria." She left. The door closed softly behind her, the same door she'd walked out of 2 weeks ago in a fury, except this time the closing felt different. Not final. Possible. Adrian stood in the hallway of his house and listened to the quiet and felt something he recognized from a long time ago, from before Sophie died, from before grief and fear had reshaped him into someone who couldn't trust the world unless he'd rigged it first. He felt like himself. Not a better version, not a curated version, not the billionaire or the everyman or the widower or the strategy, just Adrian. 32 years old, father, business owner. A man who had hurt someone he loved and was trying, imperfectly and without guarantees, to earn back her trust. He checked on Ethan one last time. The boy was asleep, sideways across the bed as usual, the dinosaur crushed beneath his cheek, one sock on and one sock missing. The crayon drawing on the nightstand had been updated. There were now 3 stick figures instead of 2. The third was taller than Ethan, but shorter than Adrian, with dark hair and a shape that might have been a jacket or might have been wings. Underneath, in the same wobbly letters, Ethan had written, "Me and Dad and V." Adrian picked it up. He held it for a long time. Then he set it back on the nightstand, adjusted the blanket, and closed the door. 3 figures. Not 2. 3. Over the months that followed, Adrian and Victoria rebuilt what they'd broken, and the rebuilding was harder and slower and messier than either of them would have liked. There were arguments. Real ones. Not the polished debates of 2 people trying to impress each other, but the raw, uncomfortable confrontations that happen when trust has been damaged and both people are trying to repair it without a manual. Victoria had days where she pulled back, where something Adrian said triggered the memory of the lie, and she went quiet in a way that made him want to explain or fix or manage. And he had to learn that quiet wasn't rejection. It was processing. It was the sound of someone deciding whether to stay. Adrian started therapy. He sat in an office twice a week and talked to a woman named Dr. Reeves about Sophie, about his father, about the elaborate system he'd built to protect himself from a pain he'd never actually processed. He talked about Victoria. He talked about Ethan. He talked about the gap between the person he wanted to be and the person he'd been, and Dr. Reeves listened without judgment and then asked questions that made him uncomfortable in the specific way that means they're the right questions. He stopped hiding at work too. He began attending industry events under his own name, showing up in rooms where people knew what Meridian was worth, and by extension, what he was worth. It was uncomfortable. People treated him differently when they knew. The slightly wider smiles, the more attentive posture, the subtle recalculations that happened behind their eyes when the number registered. Adrian noticed all of it, and he let himself notice it without using it as evidence that people couldn't be trusted. Because some of them couldn't, and some of them could. And the only way to tell the difference was to show up as himself and find out. Victoria helped, not by coaching him or managing his transformation or providing some kind of emotional roadmap. She was too busy running her own empire for that, and she would have found the suggestion insulting. She helped by being present, by showing up at his house on Wednesday nights for bad pasta, by texting him photos of dinosaur books she found in airport bookshops with the caption, "For Ethan." Not for you. By arguing with him when she disagreed with him, which was often, because Victoria Hale did not agree with people for the sake of peace. One night, about 4 months after the school festival, they were sitting on Adrian's couch after Ethan had gone to bed. A movie was playing that neither of them was watching. Victoria had her feet on the coffee table, which she'd started doing about a month ago, and which Adrian interpreted as a sign of comfort more meaningful than any declaration. "I have something to tell you," Adrian said. Victoria tensed, slightly, almost imperceptibly, but he saw it. The micro-reaction of a woman whose body still remembered the last time he'd said something unexpected. "It's not bad," he said quickly. "It's not a lie. It's not a secret. It's just something I want to say." "Okay." "I love you." The room got very quiet. The movie murmured in the background. The refrigerator hummed. Victoria looked at him. "Are you sure?" "Yes, because that's a big thing to say, and I need to know that you're saying it as yourself and not as some version of yourself that thinks it's what I want to hear." "I'm saying it as the guy who makes terrible pancakes and sold his Honda Civic and goes to therapy twice a week because a woman he cares about told him he needed to. I'm saying it as Ethan's dad. I'm saying it as me." Victoria was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then she said, "I love you too. I've loved you since the diner, since you let me eat your fries without asking." Which, for the record, was the most intimate thing anyone had done for me in years. Sharing fries? Sharing food without making it transactional, without keeping score. You just let me take them, like it was obvious, like of course I could have whatever I wanted from your plate. Adrian reached over and took her hand. She let him. Her fingers were cold. They were always cold. A fact he'd learned over months of small, accumulated intimacies that had nothing to do with grand gestures and everything to do with showing up. I want you to stay, he said. Not tonight. I mean, in general. In this life. In this house. With the bad cooking and the Lego landmines and the kid who thinks worms have feelings. I want you to be here. I'm already here. I know. I just wanted to say it out loud, because I spent a long time not saying things out loud, and I'm trying to fix that. Victoria squeezed his hand. You're fixing it. Yeah? Yeah. She leaned her head against his shoulder. But the pancakes still need work. I'll take a class. Please do. They sat together on the couch and didn't watch the movie and didn't talk about billion-dollar companies or quarterly reports or any of the things that the world saw when it looked at them. They were just two people who had found each other in a restaurant neither of them should have been in, who had hurt each other and forgiven each other and chosen, with full knowledge of the cost, to try again. Upstairs, Ethan slept sideways, the dinosaur crushed beneath his cheek, one sock on and one sock missing. On the nightstand, the drawing with 3 stick figures had been joined by a new one, a larger scene, drawn with the wild ambition and limited technical skill of a 6-year-old artist. It showed a house, a car, a park with what appeared to be an octopus in the sky, which was probably a kite, and 3 figures standing together, holding hands. The tallest one had been labeled Dad. The shortest one had been labeled Me. And the one in the middle, the one with dark hair and what Ethan had carefully drawn as a smile, had been labeled with a single letter. V. Here is what Adrian Cole learned, though it took him longer than it should have and cost him more than it needed to. Love is not a test. It is not a system, or a strategy, or a screening process designed to protect you from the possibility of pain. Pain comes regardless. It comes for billionaires and kindergarten teachers, and people who forget their wallets and people who pay strangers' bills. It does not care about your net worth or your defenses or how carefully you've engineered your life to avoid it. What you can control, the only thing you can control, is whether you face it as yourself. Not as a performance, not as a version, not as a carefully constructed identity designed to minimize risk, as yourself. Flawed, scared, uncertain, and real. Because the people who are worth keeping, the Victorias, the Ethans, the Marcuses, and Lindas, they don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to be wealthy or ordinary or impressive or safe. They need you to be present. They need you to show up in the room as the person you actually are and trust that it's enough. Adrian Cole spent 2 years testing love. He sat across from woman after woman, wearing a costume, running an experiment, and watching them fail a test they didn't know they were taking. He called it protection. He called it safety. He called it being a good father. It was none of those things. It was fear. And fear, when you give it a system and a schedule and a Honda Civic, looks an awful lot like wisdom. But it isn't. It's just fear with better infrastructure. The night Victoria Hale paid a stranger's dinner bill, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't performing or testing or calculating. She was just being kind, automatically, the way some people are kind when nobody's watching. And that small, unwitnessed act of decency did something that 2 years of strategic dating never could. It showed Adrian what it looks like when someone is real. The rest, the lies, the confrontation, the 2 weeks of silence, the slow and imperfect rebuilding, was just the road between recognizing the truth and learning to live it. It was a long road. It was a messy road. It had bad pancakes on it and scattered playing cards, and a 6-year-old magician who never did learn how to do the trick right, but performed it with such joy that it didn't matter. And at the end of it, not the final end, because there is no final end, because love is not a destination but a practice, there was a house on a quiet street with glow-in-the-dark stars on a bedroom ceiling, and a refrigerator that hummed too loud, and 3 people sitting at a table that used to seat 2. Not perfect, not easy, not a fairy tale, just real.